Well, hey there. You've stumbled upon the intersection of internet quandaries and psychological insight. Welcome to Veritas Views on AITA, where the quirks of the internet meet the expertise of Veritas Psychology Partners.
Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Michael MacBride. I am joined by our dynamic duo of psychologists.
Hi, I'm Dr. Gayle MacBride, and Dan, you're joining me today. You've been my business partner, but did you realize Veritas Psychology Partners has turned 2? We've been in business for 2 years together. Dan,
That's right.
it's wonderful doing business with you.
Well,
Yeah, no, it is. You know, we bring our individual strengths both to this podcast, but also to our business and the passion for our work. And I'm really glad we're still doing this. So
excellent.
Happy anniversary.
That's terrific. That's terrific. And I'm really glad to be here. This is something of a highlight for me. That, you know, we often get to like shoot the shit about challenging things, and Michael always brings us something new and special about which to banter. So, Michael, what do you have for us this week?
Yeah, well, welcome both of you. For the newbies out there, if you don't know what this is, this podcast, basically I've gone out and I found something on the internet where people posted a scenario, shared a story, and essentially asked readers to weigh in who's the asshole there. And that's what we're going to try to do. Where there's been specific information, I've tried to make it a little more discreet so it's less identifiable. And if you're new, stick around through the credits. We always have some kind of bonus conversation as well. So, but neither Dan nor Gayle know what I'm going to ask them about. So let's go. Today's prompt is, am I the asshole for not giving up my check? I'm sorry, let me start over. Am I the asshole for not giving up my checkout spot to a woman with fewer items?
I do appreciate when I'm standing there with one or two things being allowed to go first, but
yeah, this is like a I'm wondering, like, is there going to be some like gender stuff in here about gender expectations? Is there going to be stuff coming in around the reasonableness of balancing out other people's convenience versus mine? I'm
curious.
Yeah, I'm curious.
There are many variables that would make one an asshole or not for making this decision.
Yes, absolutely. So, as usual, OP has given us a clickbait title, which they should do because they want us to click through. And now we're going to get to hear the cool stuff. Michael, what's the story that we're going to have here behind the?
Yeah. Well, as Paul Harvey would say, and now the rest of the story.
Oh, Paul Harvey was amazing.
I can't do him justice, but yeah. So this guy, the poster is male, and he is 30s something. And this is what he said. This happened a couple of days ago, and I've honestly been thinking about it more than I probably should. I was at the grocery store grabbing a few essential items, nothing major, just 10 items exactly. So I got in the express lane. As I started unloading my stuff, a woman behind me, slightly older, maybe mid-40s, asked if she could go ahead because she had 2 things. I glanced back, and yeah, she had a couple small items, but I was halfway through unloading, and there were other people behind her also. So I just said, sorry, I already started, and kept going. I didn't say it in a rude way or anything, just stated it and moved on. She didn't argue, but she let out this dramatic sigh and started muttering under her breath about how manners are gone and people have no decency. It was awkward. The guy behind her gave me this kind of tight-lipped smile, like he didn't want any part of it. I didn't think too much of it until later that night when I told a friend and they said, I should have just let her go. It would have taken 30 seconds, and why not? A little kindness would go a long way. And maybe they're right, but I was already mid-checkout, and I didn't feel like shuffling everything around to accommodate her. I had waited my turn, and it felt like I was entitled to that. Now I'm still wondering if I was being stubborn or just normal. Am I the asshole?
This is really, I think, a very good question, and I don't have an immediate feeling one way or another.
Well, yeah, but this gives me an opportunity. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, tell me your opportunity, please.
This gives me an opportunity to cite one of my favorite pieces of psychological research. And as the listeners know, I love to do that. But in this research, they wanted to know whether or not people would defend a territory that was no longer valuable. and they look specifically at parking spaces. A parking space close to the store is very valuable on your way in. But once you've done your shopping and you've gotten back in your car, it has no value anymore. And what they found is that if someone was visibly waiting for your spot, people took longer to pull out than if there was nobody waiting for the spot, with the theory that you're defending your territory, you're defending your spot, even if it no longer has value to you. That there's something inherent. Now, when you ask people about this, they're like, I just got out as quickly as I could. But like there's this subtle underneath, like unintentional subconscious defense of a territory we've obtained, even if it doesn't have value. So now how does this, in my head, this relates because this person is defending some territory. Now, it does still have value to him. So it's not valueless. But the question here is he reasonably defending this spot that he has obtained? Or is he being a jerk about it when it would be really a lot nicer and cooler and fine to like give up his spot in exchange for this person who's going to move through the line quickly and ostensibly not take up very much time at all and should have the space? Or maybe this doesn't relate at all, but I just it was an excuse to talk about this piece of research that I love so much.
And I know we've talked about this research, you and I, before, and I think about it.
So I like it too much and I talk about it too much.
No, I mean, it's really fascinating, and it definitely does stick in my brain. And I think about it sometimes when we're driving and you want to merge over, and while you don't have a static piece of territory, trying to merge into a lane in moving traffic. Also, people will defend this territory under their wheels at this moment, their position in line. And so I think about it, and I think it is, I agree with you, really fascinating research. What came up for me when I was listening to the scenario was something very different. And so we can choose which track we pursue a bit further on
or
this.
Both.
Or both. Was sort of this idea that we've talked about in terms of apologies being a gift that should be freely given. And I sort of think the line in a spot is your spot, right? And it needs to be freely given. I think her asking for it feels problematic. It's sort of like asking for an apology. You're asking for the gift. Now, maybe if it had been more than 10 items, gosh, you've got, a cart full, I've just got a couple of items, maybe, but it feels like when you're in an express checkout line, the idea is we're all trying to get through relatively quickly. Why does your ask then elevate your place in this line? And maybe I'm defending my territory. I'm a little bit, I have a bit of a problem with her asking for it. I would have zero problem if he offered it.
Totally. I actually agree with you. This is my excuse to talk about this literature piece that I love so much. But in my head, I was waiting for that question of OP saying whether he had the cart full of groceries. Right. Which I've been in that situation. You've got this like massive cart of groceries, and you look behind you, and someone's holding like a cantaloupe and a package of dental floss, and you're like, go. Like you don't even have a cart; they just hold you. They're like, yeah, go. And I've been the person with the cantaloupe and I don't know why I picked those two items. I've actually never bought those two items together. But I've been that person. Oh yeah, thank you so much. But I've never. I don't imagine like it would take a lot to say. Like I try to put myself in her shoes also. There would have to be a really compelling reason for me to say, hey, can I go ahead of you?
Absolutely. And I don't think, I mean, I have been that person in that situation holding, apparently we're shopping for cantaloupe and dental floss. Okay.
Don't know why.
And those two things do not go together. Maybe dental floss and pineapple.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
But okay. It's a bad example. Yeah, okay.
But holding there with these two items and going, okay, this person, as you said, has the cart full of groceries. But I'm going to sit in some acceptance of I'm in the express lane and this person has the correct number. Now, I will admit I have been prone to counting the number of items, right? Are you within the rules of it? But I wouldn't call someone out on it. I would secretly like maybe mutter. But then this lady in line then has this exaggerated reaction, according to the OP. Again, this is, right? We have the data that we have. And she is calling him out in subtle ways by muttering about decency, etc. Why does she think she has the privilege to cut in line when, rules are being followed? We're assuming it's all in under 10 and everyone's got a few things. I fail to understand how this lady is in the right. She could ask, but then she needed to accept the answer she was given and it needed to drop.
She has every right to ask. I don't know
For
that I would
sure.
ask.
I wouldn't have asked,
If
but
I
she has a
had two,
right
I
to
always
ask.
say, if I had two items, the person ahead of me had 10 items in the express lane, I wouldn't even think about asking. If I was in a regular lane and I had two items and they had a cart full, I still don't know that I would ask, but I would certainly, maybe if it might be a situation where I just can't, you know, but once you ask, the person's like, yeah, no.
Right. You accept the answer you're given.
All right. Like it's not,
Right. She's
it,
getting coercive and kind of icky by rolling her eyes and commenting on common decency. That's not common decency at this point. You're trying to guilt this guy into doing something different. He set a boundary, he said no.
right. And that's one of the things that we talk a lot with folks, with our clients about is how to set an appropriate boundary.
Yeah.
I'm in, and his appropriate boundary could have been like, I've already started, so no. And it could have just been no. I mean,
Right.
without getting overly cutesy into sayings, no is a complete sentence. And sometimes the answer is just, yeah, no. And while we can argue about whether he's being a jerk, I struggle to see this as a dickish thing to do, to say no.
Yeah.
In the scenario, as we always say, in the scenario as
presented.
Right. As presented.
Right.
Like if he'd rolled his eyes and be like, "Oh, come on, lady! Like, come on, I'm here. I waited too." Like if he, and maybe he did all that stuff and he's deleted that and not noted it. So, there may have been situations where her responses are very reasonable because people do say things from their own perspective.
Sure. So massage the facts. Let's say he rolls his eyes. Come on, lady, this is unreasonable. I only have 10 items. Right. And he shuts her down and says no. He's still within his right to say no, where the dickish behavior would be is then in the calling her out.
Right. And of course,
at that point, don't fucking escalate and then talk about common decency. This is not the time or the place to hash this thing through.
Right.
Right. And then the third guy in line's like, oh my God. Right. He's so embarrassed about what's going down.
To be clear, I intentionally used language there that would be dickish. Just anytime a man says lady, like that's condescending, rude, hostile. Like that's an aggressive word.
Yes.
Except for in the Styx song.
I'm sorry?
Except for in the song by Styx.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Right. Thank you for bringing up an obscure 80s reference. I appreciate that. But no, I just wanted to clarify that I was intentionally using inflammatory language.
Right. Well, and I'm arguing with you that even if he used inflammatory language, the no is not inappropriate. Perhaps the additional way he responded would have been, but still, I don't think he was obligated to give up his place in line.
Right.
Even if he hadn't gotten started, even if he was standing at the conveyor belt and, holding his basket full of things and hadn't put a single item on the belt, he's allowed to say no.
Right. No, that's totally true.
He denied it. Period. That is the discussion. She was in the wrong for escalating it.
Right. If he'd said no in the asshole way I mentioned, that would be a different story.
No, I mean his no is still allowed. He'd be an asshole for responding beyond the no as an asshole. But the no
exactly. He's still not an asshole for saying no. He'd be an asshole if he said, "Come on, lady, I waited here too."
Right.
Exactly. Then he'd be an asshole for saying that. But if he just said, but the no part of it is not an asshole thing to do. We're agreeing that
yes,
it's just like he is under 100%. No obligation at that point. Even if he had the cart full of groceries, he's still not an asshole for saying no.
Right.
Although I think it would certainly
not looking so good.
It's not a great thing to do.
It's not a good look.
But asshole really requires, we talked about this, like being an asshole requires this level of unkindness that is not just generic, like, no, like I don't want to let you ahead of me.
Right. No, asshole requires, we've talked about it before, mens rea, this idea of intent to hurt. And that can be maybe formed in the moment, like I'm going to really shut you down, lady, but that's not this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now I want to know, Dan, is this lady an asshole for asking?
No,
Okay.
I don't think, but if her response was as described,
Her response.
now there's a response that I'm still not willing to say asshole, but it's kind of dickish. Like
Her
you ask
response.
her if her response was as described, rolling, sighing, the heavy sigh, like sometimes you can't control that, but the death of common decency or whatever it is that she said, like that's again, if this were as described, no. I mean, he's under no obligation to give up his space in line. Even if your request is reasonable, he's under no obligation to give it up. That's just I'm hoping maybe this is just a bad day for her or something. And I'm kind of hoping that OP left something out here to make it a little less like, because he really did describe the situation that painted her in a super bad light and painted him as a good guy. And I'm always a little suspect about those kind of descriptions.
So you think he like ran to the checkout ahead of her and like scooted in and
I don't know. Maybe he like said it in a mean way that he doesn't like. Sometimes we don't always recognize, and this is part of that parking spot thing I mentioned at the beginning. We don't always recognize the tone that we're using. Like he might have turned to her and forget that really misogynistic, really nasty tone that I took earlier with it describing it. Maybe he just looked at it and went, "No." And he was like, he thought in his head it's painted as, no, I'm in the middle of something. He might have gone, no, I'm in the middle of something.
Yeah.
And those two messages, and we often talk with our clients, and people say, well, I said this. And like the way in which something is said, the meta communication is like 90% of the communication. And no, I'm really sorry, I'm in the middle of my checkout already is completely different than, no, I'm in the middle of my checkout already. What? Same words with a totally different meaning. We don't know what tone he actually used. We know what tone he thinks he used or what tone he'll cop to.
Right. No, I agree. And then there's this piece of, I think she really expected him to say yes.
Yeah.
You don't get this kind of big reaction unless you think your request is reasonable enough and the person is going to grant it to you. So in her head, she played this through, and the ask was going to come with an ability to cut in line, as it were. She was just going to scoot around him. It didn't matter that these items are already on the belt. She was just going to plunk her things down and do the transaction and get out. And she saw this play out, and he said no. And that unmet expectation led to a really big disappointment in her brain. She couldn't reconcile how that reality that she played through without even really thinking about it intentionally, it just fell apart, and the discrepancy between the ideal and the real left her feeling annoyed and frustrated. And I find myself wondering about social status and privilege in here, in these between these two people. It wasn't enumerated or described. But, as a white lady, if I am behind a person of color and I make that ask and then I'm disappointed because I wasn't able to trade on my privilege, is that something that's going on here? I wonder. I feel kind of icky about it in my gut, and I don't know
Yeah,
that
it's
we
funny.
know.
And my first thought here was to wonder whether there was some gender role stuff here as well. And
Mm.
I don't, there's a
Right. And then
lot.
we get messaging, ladies first. So then there just is an expectation that that's what's going to happen.
Right.
I don't know.
I
But how did that expectation get set?
Yeah, and I think part of this is that this is a different, like I think about the scenario where someone is seated in the like spot on the subway that says handicapped, disabled, elderly,
Yeah.
people with small children.
Yep.
And maybe they're in one of those categories, but someone who has a greater need shows up. And now we've got like a good reason for the ask. But this isn't that situation. This is two people who have more or less equal right to use the space. And the number of items I'm struggling with this scenario because if it really did happen the way OP describes it, it's problematic, and I'm more frustrated with the person, with the asker, than I am with him. But again, I'm very curious about what he actually, if we don't have like a camera on the actual, like we don't have footage of the interaction that might have made this different.
Yeah.
I can't call him an asshole. I don't think there's enough information for me to call her an asshole, but the description of her behavior certainly describes someone who's not being kind or respectful in the moment. But I don't know if it's accurate or not.
I would actually fully agree with you.
Oh shit.
Which is sort of boring. I know.
That's annoying.
It is annoying, but I think
wow.
it is relatively clear here that as posted, and we've agreed. It's fine that she asked. It's fine to ask. But when you ask, you need to accept the answer because the ask has inherently in it options. And you are requesting someone exercise one of the options. And you need to accept the option that they've exercised. If not, it's really a demand.
Yeah. I like that differentiation.
Yeah. Right.
That if the person asks and then gets annoyed, it makes all sorts of things. Now it turns that's good.
Thanks.
Yeah, I know. We certainly say that in couples we work with. Well, I only asked. Well, yes, you only asked, but then you followed up the ask when they said no with anger, with frustration, with hostility. So it wasn't just a question. And people often bring this like, it was just a question.
Right.
It wasn't.
Or parents. I see this a lot in parents where they talk to their kids about needing, wanting, doing something, and they give their child some options. But the reality is sometimes the options given were not acceptable options. And so often I'm cautioning parents to only give options that are acceptable options. Right. So, it's A or B, but don't put C on the table if C is not an acceptable option.
So, Michael, what did the internet say?
Yeah, well, the internet. Well, before I get to that, one of the side conversations,
please,
that they talked about that I part of why this piqued my interest in general is just all the dynamics of line being in a line, right, or a queue, right, and figuring that out. And one of the pieces that ended up being a big conversation in this thread was what happens to the people behind her. Like, it's one thing if you're in line and she's behind you and there's nobody else and you say, go ahead, that's fine. Like, great, you have all the right and permission to let somebody go ahead of you. But the minute there is somebody else behind her and somebody else behind them, and in this case it sounds like there was a decent queue, then what does that look like? Like, where do you have the right to let one person, but not everybody else, go ahead of you? And that dynamic was super interesting to see people kind of wrestle through. So I'm curious if you have thoughts on that piece before we.
Well, the question I would have there is in letting her ahead, does that, because you bring an interesting point, or the internet brings an interesting point. If he has to then move his things out of the way, he has now delayed everyone else in line. So he's made a decision on behalf of himself and everyone else. Now, if he hasn't put his stuff out there yet, or if his stuff can just sit there and it doesn't delay things, that's a different question. But
what sort of social precedent does it start, right? Yeah. Now you've got 2 items, I've got 10, and now 3 or 4 people down the line have witnessed this, and they have 2 items, and the person, like, where does it the social pressure of conforming also impact this? Now, this is really, really random, but my brain can't help but hear the I think it was Seinfeld, but Michael, you're going to correct me if I was wrong. It was a whole bit about being next in line and how exciting it was to be next. I'm next. Ooh, I'm next. Like, how exciting that next was. And I feel like I remember seeing the bit or the shtick was, I think it was George, maybe. Don't quote me. And he would let someone go in front of him because I'm still just next. I'm next. And he was so excited about being next.
It's so exciting.
This is not that scenario. This is the opposite.
No, this is the opposite of that scenario. It's my turn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So if this caused any delay at all for the people behind, I would agree that he's now obligated to say no. because he can't make a decision on their behalf.
Yeah.
So not only is he not the asshole, but if he were to say yes, others in line might have the opportunity to go, hey, you've delayed me or her, and you've made a decision that influences me. Now you're the asshole. Now you're the asshole for doing that, for saying yes. It'll be a bit of a stretch, I understand, but underscoring that. Other comments, Michael? Or I'm sorry.
So I mean, the answer for the internet was that this guy's not the asshole. Like, he waited in line, he did everything right. He was asked a question, he answered the question. By his depiction, he was not rude in his response, and there is no way that he is the asshole in that scenario. My favorite conversations about the queuing and the line management and the dynamics of all that stuff was one user, and I was trying to find it again. I left myself a note about it. But anyway, basically that user said, like, what the fuck? I mean, you're already in the express lane. Like, nobody here is waiting for an hour for someone to bag groceries. You're talking about a matter of minutes. Like, what privileged assholes are in this line where bickering over a minute or two or how long you're inconvenienced for this? Like, fuck off, all of you, essentially.
Okay, so the internet, as usual, was more strongly worded than we were.
Was a little bit harsher than we were willing to be.
Less nuanced.
Yeah.
It's sort of like being at the light and you have two lanes that are going to merge into one, and you've got one person who really wants to get in front, but your travel time is going to change by fractions of seconds at that point. Like that territory again feels really important and valuable, but is it really?
It does. And I will admit that, like, there have been times where I've been like, no, you can't get ahead of me. No, you can't. And I have, like, my way of coping with that has been trying to say, wait a second, like, this doesn't actually cost me anything. And if it does cost me something, it might cost me 2 to 3 seconds.
So it's really interesting.
Agita I'm experiencing is much greater than 2 to 3 seconds of my time.
Yeah. And so that's interesting cognitive work. I've done that with clients before. I had an interesting instance where doing it on the fly didn't work. And so we talked about kind of inoculating. And when you're in the situation, assuming that things are going to get tense, and to sort of preload and pre-think about what that's like and work on being okay with, I'm going to slide in behind this person because, it is not going to be disruptive to my journey or meaningful in any way. I'm not going to see any change or outcome. And preloading that really helped this person be a much less aggressive driver.
I really like that, and it is something that I've done as well with folks. I think about, and we were just talking about this recently, this one particular merge here in the Twin Cities area, where if people did it correctly, everyone would go to the end, and then they merge at the end of this pretty zipper merge. But they tend to, because Minnesotans try to be nice, they tend to all move over early, and then someone doesn't move over, and there's often conflict, and it's tense internally. And I love this idea of, let's talk about this particular spot so you can go to this particular spot and talk yourself through it as it happened. And that idea of inoculating against the angry response or the anxious response or the whatever response by prepping ahead of time is really valuable. And it's something that is a piece of good cognitive therapy, is doing that play through in your head. So, and for a lot of folks, like, it's even useful. Like, hey, now after you're in the playthrough, go there, like, intentionally go there.
Yes, right. Expose yourself to it and practice it, because the only way it's going to stick is if you put it into use. And in the previous episodes, our episode with Shannon Getke Watson, we were talking about the brain model and how many different parts of the brain are involved, and to be able to employ that exercise and that skill in that moment helps solidify the messaging when you need it. So they talk about what's wired together fires together, and you can only wire it together once you've practiced it all the way through because you invoke the right brain regions to create that messaging. And so you have to practice it. This is the, kind of going back to our previous episode again, it's the value of therapy homework. And occasionally I have someone come in and go, "Oh, I don't want to do homework in therapy." Well, if we're trying to make substantial change, homework is often really a necessary component of what you're doing. Now, if we call it homework or we call it something else, sometimes therapists might be a little bit sneaky in how we how we deliver that messaging. But work outside of therapy is important and critical to making long-term and lasting change.
Right. No, and people, I do say that is like you don't have to do it. However, all the research says that if you do the homework, if you do the practice, you're going to get better faster, spend less time in therapy,
Yeah.
have greater, better likely outcomes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, there was a time as a therapist where I did homework and then I wasn't assigning homework because I felt like people weren't always like it was hard to do. And the research really says that if you give your clients homework and they do it, they progress faster.
Yes.
So
So do we render a verdict? Did we hit all our marks, Michael?
I think so. I was gonna circle back. So Dan, that research at the beginning, I'll make sure to add that link to this. But
Thank you.
2006 was when that came out. And then the other Seinfeld references, I'll try to get in there. But apparently there are at least 9 episodes that deal with waiting in line in Seinfeld, which is kind of interesting. And the one that the internet, like the quick Google search suggested, was probably the one where Kramer's waiting for a rental car and the pretzels are making him thirsty. That episode has a lot about talking about waiting in lines, but like the Chinese restaurants waiting in lines, the even the
babka.
Yeah, the babka, the soup Nazi, like it comes up in a lot of episodes where they talk about waiting in line and that dynamic, which is kind of funny. But anyway, thank you again for another riveting debate and a glimpse into the collective conscience of the internet forums. Remember, morality is often shades of gray and not just black or white.
All right. Well, guys, don't wait in line. Like, follow, share, and definitely subscribe to this podcast. You'll never have to wait in line for the podcast to drop. I can't guarantee other lines.
There you go.
For sure. And stick around through the credits for whatever the bonus conversation will be about today.
You can follow Dr. Dan Kessler at Dr. Dan Kessler and Dr. Gayle MacBride at Dr. G. MacBride. Oh, and you can find them both at veritaspp.com. Credits. Tickling the Ivories, Matthew Reddington. Art, production, and design, bringing this show together with flair and finesse, Michelle Love. Recording and editing, turning chaos into something worth sharing, Michael MacBride. Intro, outro, I'm Kelly Buttrick, a VO talent who just happens to be Dr. MacBride's cousin. Cats, CJ, Linus, Sadie, and Griffin. Hosting by whomever lost the coin flip. Interruptions by all their children. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Listening to this podcast does not constitute a therapist-client relationship. If you believe you may be experiencing a mental health issue, please seek the assistance of a qualified mental health professional. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, you can call or text 988 from anywhere in the U.S. to be connected to Crisis Mental Health Services.
Thanks for listening. As promised, here's that bonus conversation.
Dan, I would like you to talk a little bit on the show about something we spoke, a research article that you read recently that you shared with me. It was about banking habits and what we were noticing in banking habits and spending, because that was really interesting and it's really, I remember it.
And we'll put a link to this in the show notes. And when I say we'll put a link, Michael will find it. Yeah. So I don't want to take credit for this. But there was a bit of research recently that came out that retrospectively looked at the banking habits of older folks.
Retrospectively, you define that just in case it's confusing for someone.
Sure. I'll start again. There was a recent research article that looked back at years of banking habits, online banking habits of older folks. And in doing that, they found that there were some changes that occurred long before the person was even diagnosed with dementia, that there were changes that they could find in their banking habits that were indicators of people who would develop dementia or were developing dementia. And they were things like frequently changing passwords, which of course freaked me out because how often do I change my password? Oh my gosh. The frequently changing passwords, a reduction in spending on hobbies and things of interest, a reduction in just going to the banking website and looking at balances and banking information, less active approach to finances, and that these multiple factors just in their banking habits, in their online banking habits, showed or predicted the possibility that this person was entering a dementia. Fascinating research, and I think that we're going to see this sort of data gathering, the way that companies have been using for years your data in order to market to you. I think we're going to start seeing more and more of medicine looking at aggregated data and being able to say, wait a second, this person has all the markers of this illness or this mental health problem or this disease process or this dementing process, and being able to pull this data and use it to say, you've done this 15 times, you need to go see your doctor and get a checkup for this potential. Like, that's going to happen. It seems a little freaky weird, but this is there's certainly a dark side to AI. This is a bit of a bright side, and I'm really looking forward to how this whole body of literature is gonna maybe play out in a way that could really help people instead of just using all of our data to market shit to us.
Yeah.
So,
fascinating.
Michael, did you find it already?
I did. Yeah. So it was the Federal Reserve Bank in New York and Georgetown University, and it came out May 2024, so just last year. But a lot of the findings have been rolling out recently, and the implications. So I'll be sure to link that.
Cool.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Tune in again next week for a whole nother Am I the Asshole debate.
We love hearing from you, so please review us on Apple, Spotify, or, well, wherever you're listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please review, like, and follow. Also, give it a share. This helps us reach more listeners.